Mind Behind the Music, we're joined by guitarist, author, and lifelong educator, Ande Flavelle. Ande has taught guitar for more than 4 decades, logging tens of thousands of private lessons and shaping players of every style and level. He's best known for his Sound Connection series, a collection of books and workshops that helped an entire generation of guitarists understand rhythm, phrasing, and the mechanics of great playing. Long before online tutorials, Ande was breaking down complex musical ideas into practical, playable steps, giving students a clear path from fundamentals to full musicianship. We'll talk about his years of one-on-one teaching, the creation of Sound Connection, his approach to rhythm and groove, and how he sees guitar education evolving today. Welcome, Ande.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, besides being an author of the Sound Connection books, you've taught private lessons for over 45 years and tell me that you've taught 60,000 plus individual one-on-one guitar lessons. This is an amazing number and begs the question, how can you stand teaching so much when most of the guitarists today just want to play?
Yeah, that number blows my mind too sometimes. But when I factor into the mix that I taught a minimum of 30 people a week, and I would take a couple of weeks off during the year. So let's make it 50 weeks out of the year. If you do the numbers, 30 times 50 and then times 45, you come up with like over 65,000. You knock off 10% for cancellations or something, and there you have it. But it still blows my mind. But the reality is I just really enjoyed it. I've always enjoyed working one-on-one with people. Personally, I'm kind of an introvert. The whole sex, drugs, rock and roll, get out there wasn't really appealing to me. I came from a show business family. First tour of Vegas, I was 4 years old. My dad was all over the place. And it was fun to be on the fringe of that, but it wasn't really what attracted me to it. Music's always been a very personal journey for me. And I like working one-on-one with people and trying to help them, develop the skills that, would allow them to express themselves musically instead of just listening to it.
Yeah, what differences did you see in attention, confidence, and motor learning between a 9-year-old beginner and a 29-year-old beginner? And how did you adapt materials for each?
Well, some of that has to go simply by the personality of the person and what they want to learn, but there are some stark differences. Um, each one of them has an advantage over the other and a disadvantage. The advantage a 9-year-old has is that everything's new and exciting, and you're literally doubling your knowledge every week. And it's, if you're a decent teacher, you're pouring gas on that flame. And but the disadvantage is that they don't have the motor skills. Maybe if they're 9 years old, you see the common thing of reaching over and helping the finger on the left hand, especially if you're right-handed. And they're struggling with it. It's difficult. They're learning about learning. It's not just memorizing stuff in school and getting a grade. You have to really apply yourself. On the other hand, somebody who's 29, they've got all the motor skills. They understand practice. They come to the whole picture knowing what they're getting into. There's no reality shock. The disadvantage for them is that, I was compared to skiing. If you had a kid who was on skis from the time they were, say, 4 or 5, they're going to be really adept. And by the time they're in their teens, that whole balance thing is just going to be genetically coded. They're going to just have it so down. It's just going to
Like
be part
second nature for them.
like breathing. Yeah. And if you get somebody who's older who starts to learn how to ski, they can do it. They can intellectually apply themselves to it and take lessons and respond. But I think it'd be a lot harder for them to get to that point where they're just breathing it. They just know balance and the whole skill of skiing. And I think it's not safe to make generalizations, but if you are starting an instrument at age 40, you might be able to progress very quickly, but I think you'll never really have the advantage that person who started when they were super young, or even 10, 12, 14. They'd have more time to develop with it.
I started playing when I was 13. For me, it came pretty naturally because I already had the discipline and the determination, drive from being an athlete. So when I approached playing guitar, I thought of it more as like not only an art form, but approaching it like an athlete. So where, there's a physical demand. I knew what it took to push myself beyond the limits and to succeed at, playing in a piece that, I was determined to play. I totally agree with you as far as motor skills go. The advantage that you might have when you're older unless you're, running into like arthritis. And I always loved teaching younger students because they would absorb everything like a sponge.
Exactly.
And they would just accept it for what it was. I love teaching young students because they adapted to learning to read music, pretty quickly. They didn't have a preconceived notion of, that it being difficult, as what, older, people might perceive,
Oh, I hear you.
like thinking that reading music is like math, you know?
Well, exactly. I mean, and especially with guitar players who are very intuitive and circular and just want to go by feel and just see what the guitar is sounding like and go from there. Sometimes you'll know a kid in grade school who knows they want to be a doctor, who absolutely has that vision. And lo and behold, they become a doctor. And you do read interviews sometimes where some famous guitar player picked up the guitar at 9 and he knew that was for him. Um, that's always very inspiring to me, but I was not that kid. And most of the people that I taught were not that person either. Most of the people I ever taught came to the whole interaction of taking lessons with what I call a fragile dream, because they had this notion in their head that I really love music. I respond to it. It gives me so much, emotional nutrition. And I'm daring, could I possibly do that? And it's something that you could really easily stomp out that flame if you're not approaching it with some sensitivity. You want to pour gas on that flame. You want to let that person think there's no reason you couldn't. Why there's a skill here. I mean, I always say it's like writing a book. Anybody can learn how to read and write. That's not a talent. That's a skill. You write a best-selling novel, now that's another story. Maybe you won't write a hit song, but you can definitely play. You can, unless you've got some physical encumbrance of some kind. But there's always that fragile dream in the beginning that most people have and they approach you with. And you have to respond to that. I had that. I remember it very clearly. So, I saw it in my students and I tried to encourage them.
So you think that's definitely one of the crucial elements of teaching is the encouragement.
And I think the best teachers themselves, at least the ones I've had that really stood out, they were exciting to me because they were still learning themselves and they were excited about it. They were sharing information. You don't want some guy who's bored. He's really just doing this to moonlight and make a couple extra bucks, and he could care less. I mean, you're going to be the worst teacher in the world. You're going to be killing a kid's interests. It's so you have to be very mindful of your approach, not just what you're saying in terms of skills.
That definitely makes sense. You definitely have to be passionate about it and be open minded because music is never ending. The learning process is never ending. You can always learn something. And, the thing about teaching as well is because some of the students will ask you questions about things that you would have never even thought of. And, make you have to actually think about what it is that you're trying to explain or that particular technique or whatever it was that you were explaining to them at the time. And, catch you off guard and, just keep you constantly hungry for more.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. I mean, there have been many times where a student would ask a question and I would have to think more deeply into it because I couldn't just, well, sort of kind of what I mean, but likes, I had to come up with something concrete that made sense. And to do that, I had to become more circumspect about what it was that I actually knew so that I could give them an answer that made sense and would help them. And you do wind up becoming a better musician through just the simple act of teaching somebody else.
Speaking of concrete, what concrete habits protect your patience on tough teaching days? How do you transfer those habits to students from practice culture?
Well, that's easy. I just remember how crappy a student I was when I first started out. There's a lot of kids that'll test your patience and even adults, who will kind of fight you on it. And you're thinking, especially adults, why are you pushing back? I mean, you hired me to help you, and I would assume that you think that I know something. There's any number of things that can come along during the process of working with people or kids that can be frustrating. But I remember myself, I was the laziest student you could find on the planet. I was never practicing the way I was being asked to. I was always looking for the quick fix. So basically, my patience, it's a natural byproduct of just having been there myself once.
So what do you think that taught you, from, not being the greatest student to someone that, wrote an entire book series? Obviously your attitude toward learning and practice and everything changed at some point where you decided to just sit down, focus on what you needed to do, learn what you needed to learn, and take the time that was necessary to do it. And what was it that changed your approach on?
I think the turning point came for me after I had gone to college for a year as an engineering student, believe it or not. And that's a whole different story, but it really wasn't for me. And once I got there, I realized that this is not something I'm going to be happy with making a career out of. And I was sort of falling back on what do I do now? I had a certain amount of regret, like I've wasted time. I should have been more prepared and all that kind of thing you can put yourself through. And I was really kind of at the bottom, so to speak. And I thought, well, you know what? Why don't I just do what I like? Why don't I make a shot at doing something that just matters for me instead of calculating it on the career and the expectation of income and all this sort of thing. And because music has always been very, very important to me. And I did play guitar, from the time I was around 10 or 12. I wasn't really that good at it, but I had some awareness. And I just decided, music has always been the center of my life. Why don't I take a crack at it? So I started studying with every teacher you could imagine. Literally, I mean, I was just on fire. I just, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to just go for it. And some teachers I had for a week or two, one lesson maybe, and a couple maybe for years on end. I was all over the place. I lived in New Jersey. I was driving to New York, up to Boston to meet with different specialists, jazz players, slide players, blues, all different kinds of things. And I eventually auditioned to be a classical guitar major at a local college, William Patterson University, and was lucky enough to pass the exam. And I mean that when I say lucky enough, because there was all these other kids who knew what they wanted to do from the time they were about 10 years old on, and I was competing with them. So I was very fortunate looking back, but that was definitely a turning point.
You're best known for writing your Sound Connection guitar series, Andy. What brought the idea to write your first Sound Connection Volume 1 instruction book back in the 80s? And was there a need in guitar education where you were hoping to meet at the time?
The answer to that is really kind of simple. I was teaching a lot of people and having some success with it, but the only books that were available at the time were the Mel Bay series and some Alfred books and maybe some of the Levitt books that they used at Berkeley for sight reading in different positions. But none of these were going to really get a student's, blood racing. These things were not pouring gas on the flame. As necessary as it may be, as a part of the overall education that you're trying to, instill. Why couldn't I try this? And I had no real overview of what I wanted to achieve. I just put together the first book, and it had something about how to improvise, how a bunch of different riffs, how to ear train, things like that. And then, I threw out an ad in a few magazines, and I got, I think, like 300 responses in the first month, which blew my mind. I wasn't prepared for that. I had to run to a publisher and, have it self-published. I didn't think it was going to be that. It's just going to be at a Xerox machine or something. But I was really just trying to fill a niche that really had not been filled. I mean, there was a lot of professionals making videos of their own particular style. I was trying to get something a little bit more generalized.
Oh, that's awesome. Especially, being independent back then and self-publishing, I think is cool because, in this day and age, that's pretty much where you have to be. I mean, you have to be an independent artist and you also have to be your own manager. You got to be your own publisher. You have to be your own this, that, this, that. And you were doing this stuff way back then, and this is some of the stuff that I learned while going to Musicians Institute about the, being independent like that. And so you pretty much had an idea, you were passionate about, and you set your mind to it. You decided you wanted to do it, and then you learned as you went along. How did you get 300 books, 300 of those books published and out to the people when you were only expecting three or four. How did you manage that?
It's something I don't even want to remember. It was so stressful, but I was just amazed that it worked, because in those days I didn't have a 1-800 number. I wasn't accepting credit cards. I had an ad in a magazine with a little tear-off piece. Frankly, I personally don't like to rip up my magazines. I might want to go back and read them later. It's an interview with somebody and it's the pages ripped off. But you had to cut off the little coupon, fill it out, send it checks. That you're going to have to wait. I mean, you had to have money in the bank. You had to write a check, have your parents write it, put it in an envelope, fill this thing out, send it to somebody, wait for return. I mean, it's astounding to me. It's almost as though I couldn't have put more roadblocks in the way of the person who wants to buy my book. But it worked for some reason, and I just, just sort of inched along from there. And I wrote a second book and a third and a fourth, and the whole thing became quite, an enjoyable experience for a good decade.
Did you continue to self-publish with after that point, being aware that you were going to have to come up with like 300 books?
Well, I had to learn pretty quick. I mean, I had to become the guy who was talking to the magazine reps, trying to learn how to not just order ads, but get good placement and negotiate rates, and talking to binderies and, printers and all manner of things. The cassette tapes were a whole nother thing. So it really forced me to have to become very focused. And, I was just lucky, I think.
So the original one you wrote by yourself, all by you, or did you at that point already have somebody that was a colleague for doing that for you? Or did that come when you started realizing that you're going to have to produce much more than you expected?
Well, you pretty much put your finger on it. I mean, the first one I pretty much did by myself. I had a friend who's quite a good artist who did some of the graphics. But by the time I was writing the second book, I realized that I had to step up my game. And, this is in the 80s, and there really weren't the programs available that you have now that you can make anything with. And so I had to have a calligrapher to write chord diagrams, tablature, standard notation, all the things that you would think that would be pretty easy to do on a computer today.
So did the investment balance out with the return?
It worked pretty well, mostly because I was a one-man band. As I was starting to succeed more, I was able to hire people for different, tasks. But it was pretty much a simplistic approach in the beginning. There weren't, all the work was on my shoulders. So I didn't have to worry about too much overhead besides the obvious things I've mentioned.
You mentioned to me at one point that your first editions were basically all stapled together.
Yeah, they were. It was the cheap way to go until I realized nobody can have something like that sitting on a music stand or whatever.
So, and then you got the spiral binding.
Yeah, spiral binding.
Yeah, which was pretty cool. And so that's awesome because again, it's all self-published. You did it all by yourself back in the day. There was a lot more opportunity for musicians back then. And
well, that's for sure.
And now it's an actual mandate that you have to be totally independent. So that's why I was so interested in asking that question. Now, you've taught both privately and through your Sound Connection books, Andy, which are self-directed learning methods. What have you learned about motivation and accountability for students working without a live instructor? You have to learn on their own through your books.
Well, I knew just from the get-go that books can be very formulaic. If you're trying to teach how to play the major or the minor scale all over the neck, it's not really going to help you a whole lot to see an overall neck diagram of the guitar with a bunch of dots on it. Yeah, sure, it's not inaccurate, but what do you do with it? Yeah. So that's why it was important to me, whether it was the writing that accompanied the materials that I was trying to teach, it was important to me also to have the cassette so that I could explain and demonstrate to whoever is reading the book and trying to go through the material, what it's supposed to sound like, why we're doing this, how it would work, how to approach it. Because if you think about it, the guitar is this bewildering array of frets and strings. You look at it and it's just laughing at you when you first pick up the guitar. It's not like the piano. The piano is color coded, okay? each octave is played the same. It's just so set up for the beginner, even though you have to have bass clef and treble clef. I get that, but with guitar, you have to imprint your knowledge onto it, and so therefore, just to make a book with a bunch of, like I say, scales, let's say, or chords, what am I doing with this? How do I approach it to the guitar? And that's where I found that's what I think is important to the success of the Sound Connection series. That's what was often the remarks that people were kind enough to send in, and saying it felt like I had a teacher in the room with me.
You had examples in there on how to apply it. Wasn't you weren't just teaching, a method. You weren't just teaching like chords. You were offering the explanation of inversions, for example. You had the chord progressions on how to practice it. So that was more of your idea when writing these books, was to not only teach it, but to teach students how to apply it, which with the examples would help them feel as though they had the teacher.
Yeah, there's no question. You want to be able to produce something that people can look at and find a way to use. Memorizing everything, they always say that knowledge is power, and there's all these kind of, I couldn't disagree more. You have to have the mind to be able to use it. And teaching is about not just putting in, but bringing out. And so just to read stuff off the page, yeah, it may be true, but what am I supposed to do with this? How can I apply this? And as I said, all the teachers I had who were really good teachers were very excited about sharing their knowledge about how to apply it. And you could tell that they themselves were still learning.
Yeah.
So that's really the answer to the question.
You mentioned knowledge is power, and I've always heard wisdom is knowledge applied.
So, wow, that's perfect.
Profound, right?
That's the other half of the sentence that's missing.
You can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't apply it, then it's worthless. During that decade, you self-published 4 volumes of your books, along with 12 workshop courses that were advertised in popular magazines of that era. And I recall like Guitar Magazine or Guitar World or Guitar for the Practicing Musician books or magazines back then. And now I'm not exactly sure where I saw your ad, but it was one of those. And all of your books or workshop courses shipped with audio cassettes, which you had mentioned, that helped also, for them to feel like the teacher was in the room. What did you learn about motivating self-taught players, and what would you warn authors about when writing a method that must teach without a teacher in the room?
Pretty much everything we've been talking about, but again, you were mentioning these magazines. I remember sucking them all up and just, I read them 3 or 4 times. But the most important things to me were the interviews with the players themselves, who would share how they're approaching it. I mean, how many times can we care to read about whatever amp Eddie Van Halen used, or what guitar picks or gauge strings Jimi Hendrix used? I mean, it's important. It has a value. But what were they thinking? This is one of the things that attracted me to your website. I mean, just the title, Mind Behind the Music. How are people approaching it? And you're doing some very important work there, I think. I mean, I would have loved to have had access to what you are building back in the day.
Yeah.
And I think, in terms of trying to help guide anybody else who has this desire to teach or to, just put their stuff out there, make it of a human interest, make it so that you're sharing yourself, your story, and you're also trying to anticipate the questions that the student is thinking. And they're not, they can't ask you, they're not there. They're reading their book, they're in some other state or part of the world. If you can kind of read into what you anticipate they're thinking and answer that in advance, you've got a better chance of connecting.
That's great advice for anybody that's putting out, information or a book or whatever they may be doing.
Thanks.
To really connect with their students, whether they're right there with them or, thousands of miles away. Great advice. Andy, if you rebuilt Sound Connection today, how would you replace the cassette pedagogy with modern feedback loops, slowdown tools, and micro assessments?
I mean, I would be trying to create PDF files instead of the books, digital audio clips, for just about everything. I'd have even more available, because when you're printing a book, you've got limitations to how much information you can put on the page. and that kind of thing. And you don't have those overhead costs anymore either, of the publishing and the cassettes, right, or CDs or whatever. I mean, can we even believe that we're saying cassettes? This is like back in the 1980s. But I'd be using more audio clips that are digitally, set up, and just trying to make it more accommodating to the current world.
A lot of people out there that still contact you that are still interested in those books and that material. And I'm sure that's flattering after 30 years. And it might be a little inspiring to possibly consider doing this again, but you've decided against it. You don't mind, just to elaborate on that, the reasons why I think everybody would be interested in buying that, because that'll just sum it all up for those that are still looking for the material.
I could give you a very basic formalistic answer, but I'll tell you the truth of the matter is that after having produced the 4 books and workshop series, my life was kind of interrupted by tragedy where my wife died. And it really, I appreciate it. That was back in 1995, so it's all in the past. But at the time, I was struggling. I was just trying to accommodate her needs before she passed and all this, and then grieving afterwards. And I didn't have the mental bandwidth to be able to come up with additional materials. I was actually, at the time, working very heavily on producing a songwriting course because I wanted to expand what I knew beyond just being available to guitar players. I mean, with this kind of thing, it could be for vocalists, for keyboard players, for bass players, drummers. And I got very far along in its development, but life intervened. And by the time, this is the beginning of the 90s. And by the time I had my feet on the ground again, I not only kind of had lost interest, but the internet had come along and there was a lot of really very good products available. People were just starting to learn how to do that. Some of them were free. Some of them weren't good, but a lot of them were. And essentially it just became something that I just was no longer interested in trying to breathe new life into. And over the years, many people have approached me wanting to partner up and, somehow produce this and get some retro volumes of sound connection out there and do it the more modern way we've discussed. But for me, my life is full and I'm still doing things now. If I was really retired and just sitting around playing checkers somewhere in a park with another old guy, I mean, that would be another story, but I'm not. I don't consider myself retired. I consider myself rewired. And I've got a lot of projects going and just different irons in the fire. So it just never really got to a point where I was interested in trying to resuscitate it. But it's right. It is very flattering when people approach you, and it's very kind. And it's just humbling to think. Makes me very happy to think that I made a difference in some people's lives.
Andy, AI in contemporary music is a hot topic these days among musicians. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I have a lot of thoughts, and like most people, it's a combination of being apprehensive and being excited. There's a lot of things that are positive. I mean, on the surface, I really don't even like the term artificial intelligence. We don't have robots that are digitally sentient, okay? What we have is computers that are doing what computers have always done, except they're doing a better job of it because they've got more information. But when I look on the level of, let's say, songwriting, for example, I mean, it's not, or teaching. The computer isn't doing anything that I didn't do when I was teaching. I mean, I was teaching people fundamentals of scales and chords and diatonic chords and intervals or what have you. And it was based upon my study of hundreds and thousands of years of music and how it evolved and how it got us to this point today, using all these time-tested things that are just part of the common musician's vocabulary. So it's doing the same thing, just a lot faster. Does it lose the human touch? Yeah. So in some ways it kind of irritates me or makes me apprehensive. I mean, what's the future Burning Man festival going to look like in 10 years? Is this going to be a bunch of kids standing in front of an obelisk in the desert with a big screen on top, listening to some image of a person who doesn't exist singing songs they didn't write? That kind of gets away from musicianship, and I don't particularly like that thought. On the other hand, I think that there's always a strong need for the real connection of a person playing an instrument, whether it's yourself playing for your own enjoyment or just watching, going to a concert and seeing real people up there that have got hearts and that are pumping blood through their arteries and veins, and they've got that instrument, all the energy is there. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. I don't really know much more to say. It's kind of invalidating a lot of reality when you go online and see everything that's has to be questioned because you don't know if it's AI or not. And for the most part, you have to assume it is until it's proven that it isn't. But it's only 2025. We have to see where this is going. But there's the toothpaste is out of the tube, and it's not going back in. We are going to be living in this world. We just have to figure out how to adapt to it. That's basically my overview.
Yeah, that's a good attitude.
Well, look at all the pedals that we use. I mean, those weren't available 50 years ago. You had a couple, and look at all the things you can do. There's a website by a guy. It's called Chords of Orion, and he does all of this beautiful music, very ethereal. That he's using all these different pedals, and he's demonstrating. I mean, he's teaching you how he's doing it. This is music we would never been able to do had technology not given us that advantage. So to me, technology always comes with a blessing and a curse. So look at the car. We can get to where we want to go, but it's polluting the air. I mean, there's always a give and take. It's just too early to figure out what's going to be the full advantage and disadvantage of AI.
So there's a balance, which we're going to have to learn, and regulations that are going to need to be put in place, and it'll find its balance eventually. I think your examples of the importance of performing and live performance is great, because you're not going to get that through AI. You're not going to get that same energy, that same feeling, the same vibe as you would going to a live event or performing yourself. And with that said, there's always going to be a desire for that, and that's great, because that makes me hopeful for the future of music, and that we can find a balance with AI to be used as a tool as opposed to completely relying on it to produce music for us. And
Wow.
a great example that you also brought up was the foot pedals, which the guy that you mentioned, I want to check it out actually, shows how you can use these to your creativity, and be creative with this technology. Still be able to be creative with it, and still be able to produce something beautiful and learn a new skill.
Sure.
So those
I'm
are
optimistic. I think everything you're saying is right on, and we just have to sort of the conveyor belt of time is not going backwards.
Yeah.
We have to embrace what's coming, and if you don't, you're still going to be left behind anyway.
Yeah.
Might as well be along with it and seeing what you can do that's of positive value.
Be an advocate as opposed to trying to fight against it because it's inevitable.
Yep. Think of like 50s doo-wop groups. Okay. The reason they would be practicing sitting around the burn barrel on the corner of the street is because not only did they have no practice room available, but they had to be, when they went into the studio, they were going to be recording on a one-track mic, with a mic rather, on a one-track tape machine. So if one guy clammed a note, halfway through the verse or something, they had to start the whole thing over. They couldn't edit it out. And so your level of musicianship had to be extraordinary because it was live, it was there. You couldn't, redo it or fix it or cut and paste.
Correct.
Yeah, but now, when you got multi-track recording, that gave you a whole different set of options, and people went nuts with it. It didn't necessarily reduce their ability to play, but it made some of the requirements of being a flawless performer less demanding. And I think that's what could happen. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what could happen if you had AI being something you rely on too much, and then you're calling yourself a creator. Well, no, you just programmed it with a certain bunch of parameters, and it spit out what you had in your subconscious or something. I think of it ideally, hopefully, it'll be used as a tool and not just completely overwhelm everything. But it's too early to tell.
I love your example of the one track recording to where musicians really had to be flawless, and get it done and do it perfect the first time.
Yeah.
And a lot of these older artists that are still, performing in their 70s,
Right.
like, one of my huge inspirations and one of my favorite singers for metal is Rob Halford, Judas
Hmm.
Priest.
Right.
I mean, that guy is 70 something years old, and that guy is still bringing it, you know? I mean, seriously. And that's something that Joe Lynn Turner told me too. Um, he's in his 70s, and he told me, as far as for advice goes for, musicians that want to continue to do this, throughout their lives, is even though he's, in his 70s, he still approaches, every performance as he's got to fucking bring it every single time. You got to bring it,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
And they didn't have that option, uh, like you said, back when there was a one track recorder, and somebody messed up and you had to start all over again. And that made it so that they were paying more attention to detail.
They had to. And nowadays you've got, well, I mean, one of the things
Auto
that's,
tune,
I'm sorry.
auto tune.
Oh,
You don't even have to be able to sing in key. You can
right.
click on auto tune, voila, and it's in perfect key. So then you don't have to be perfect, and that is going to go down a different road right now if we get into this, because there's some other performers out there that just are shitty, and they rely on auto tune and stuff like that, making billions of dollars, which just disgusts me and turns my stomach.
Well, my only fear would be that the instruments themselves become secondary to the process. I mean, you and I know that to learn a guitar or any instrument, you have to put in a lot of hours, and you're going to suck at it. And it's only going to increase, in a positive way, incrementally and in small doses.
Yeah.
And this is something that, again, little kids learn for the first time when they're taking a math test or history test. They just study the answers. It's like a set of bowling pins, set them up, knock them down. What's next? But they don't have to necessarily retain it. But when you are learning an instrument, you have to retain everything you've learned. You have to keep practicing so that your fingers remember what they're doing and have that motor skill and the motor memory and all that. And it's hard. It takes a lot of commitment. And I'm concerned sometimes that we're moving away from that. I mean, when was the last time you heard a guitar solo in contemporary music? And for that matter, when in contemporary music, when was the last time you heard a song that was really based around the guitar?
Yeah.
Taylor Swift in her early days used to finger pick and play and do all this stuff on keyboards and guitar. I mean, I haven't seen her movie, the Eras movie, so I'm really making a judgment here without in a vacuum of knowledge. But the clips I always see, it looks like the guitar is a prop. The only main domain of music, it seems to me nowadays, is in blues and country music. Country is still they're guitar heavy, but look at all the other stuff. It's just not there. And will that come back? I don't know.
Andy, in your personal playing, what are your current pathways and passions regarding playing guitar?
Well, I'll tell you something. When I was in college, I had this professor who had an interesting experiment he would run a couple of times a semester. And what that experiment was that he would put a fishbowl on his desk. Now, let's say that there was 24 people in the class. In that fishbowl would be 24 small pieces of paper folded in half, and on each one would be written one word. And as we left the class, every student had to take one of these little pieces of paper out of the fishbowl, and we had to go home and compose a 2-minute instrumental that exemplified emotionally what that word was. Now, if it was something like anger, that's simple, right? Or if it was rain, that's not too hard either. But what if the word on your particular slip of paper is jealousy, or intimidation, or
I would love to see something like that.
oh, well, this was what really worked for me. And the way I loved this. This just went to the center of my brain and exploded. And when we came back to class on Monday, he would, we would have to perform our pieces, but he would have written on the board all of those 24 or 6, whatever it was, messages that were on those pieces of paper. And as you played your composition to the class, if the class could identify which one of those words went with your music and it was correct, that's how your grade was based. It was phenomenal. It was just, everybody loved it. And there was really no way of doing it wrong. You just did your best to try and emotionally connect to the music. And so I really have had a lifelong connection to that concept. I mean, to me, music isn't the frame around the picture of lyrics. I think in a good song, you have a perfect marriage of the lyrics and the music. But I think sometimes, not always, with some songs, the music is almost secondary and they're not giving as much attention to the emotional aspect of it. So since I am not a singer, not a vocalist, I love to create stuff instrumentally that exemplifies some. It's like impressionism is in painting. You have a thought in your head that's pretty much spelled out in the title of your tune, and then the music is just trying to reflect that. And for that reason, I'm also very much drawn to open tunings because they completely erase the potential to play from your fingers. And I'm sure as a musician, you know what that's about. I mean, how many times did I see when I would be teaching somebody who was playing the same stuff over and over again, and you could tell they're just playing patterns from their fingers as opposed to really trying to connect with something between mind and fingers. So when you are in an open tuning, I mean, it's not for everybody. Some people are like, find it horrifying. I'm not going to give up all the stuff that I learned in standard for all these years. But for me, the advantage and the attraction is that it throws me back to that place when I was a beginner where I didn't really know anything. I didn't know how to apply anything to the fingerboard, all those strings and frets we talked about. And it throws me back to that point of just being almost like a beginner.
Yeah, you can't rely on
listening to the guitar and hearing almost what it wants to say, stumbling into happy accidents or mistakes. But I still have all my technique. I still have an ear. I still have whatever knowledge I have. But it erases all of that in a sense because you don't know where to go. It's like I said to my wife, it's like, imagine if you had been playing piano for 2 years, you're finally getting somewhere, and one day you wake up and somebody's rearranged all the keys on the strings. It makes you have to go by feel. It's all there. It sounds familiar, but it's not where you thought it was. So for me, open tunings are a tremendous attraction. And you can get chord voicings, for example, that you could not get in a standard tuning. I mean, think of the G triad, the G chord that everybody learns in their first 3 lessons, comprised of the note G, B, and D. Well, when you're playing your open position G chord, you can play it, and the highest note is the 3rd fret on the 1st string G. What if you wanted to get B on the 7th fret or D on the 10th fret? Well, you couldn't do it. But if you were in drop D, you could play G on the 6th string at the 5th fret, and it's not any real effort to stretch 2 frets higher on the 1st string and get the B. And if you really want to stretch a little further, you could even get the D. And that's the simplest of examples, but it's representative of the kind of chord voicings you can get when you are in an open tuning. You have different potentialities available to you. The dynamic range of pitch is compressed and expanded in different ways, and I just find it an immensely attractive area to explore.
That would be a great solution for someone that has creative block or writer's block, right? You know, to where you're approaching it as if it's new again, and you can't rely on the patterns. You have to rely on your ear, but you also already still have the technique, you have the know-how. And I know you mentioned to me that even after having chosen an open tuning, you start analyzing it and start breaking it down into, theories.
That's true.
That. I think that's just, it comes naturally for, somebody that's methodical and analytical like yourself, You
want to know how the gears in the box work, and you start overanalyzing and realizing, oh, okay, here's where the 6 intervals are, and here's the tenths, and here's how I can play polyphonic or whatever.
That's where balance comes in too, between, theory and creativity. And as that teacher for, so many years yourself, that I'm sure you really understand that balance, to where that is crucial to have that. Let's get back to that fishbowl concept, all right?
Okay.
Your teacher was obviously a good teacher. I've heard of teachers, and people mentioning that music are like colors, chords are like colors, and things of that nature. I've never heard of anybody taking a word and trying to produce a word like musical sounds. And I've done it with colors, to describe different colors. But how did you go about writing for a particular uncommon word other than sadness, anger? How would you inspire others to approach it?
I really don't have a good answer for that. I think you just have to throw yourself into it and see what you can do. You know, where I see this constantly is in the world of soundtracks. And I'm not talking about where it's a compilation of the greatest hits or Motown or something that are going along with some rom-com. I'm talking about where there's some sensitive scene and there's somebody's been shot, they're lying on the pavement, and what kind of music is being played behind that? There's a chase scene. What kind of music is being played behind that? Composers of soundtracks are faced with that potential all the time. They don't have a one word on a piece of paper rather, that guides them. They have this thing on the screen that they have to somehow frame in such a way that it breathes more life and reality into the experience of viewing this film. Well, you have to be emotionally available. If this isn't accounting where you're adding numbers, you don't really need, with apologies to all accountants that are listening to this, I mean, you don't need some depth of range of your full range of emotions to be able to deal with putting together somebody's tax return. If you are composing something that you wanted to specifically reflect a given thing, an emotion, an experience, you have to apply your own emotions to it, just like an actor, really. They're just acting. They just memorize lines, but what separates them is the quality of the fact that they can actually pretend their way into that character so well that it convinces us. Same thing.
So that's a good example. Now, looking back, which part of the sound connection method aged best? Which one would you rewrite entirely for today's players who learn on YouTube and TikTok and short bursts? I know we already discussed that you wouldn't do that again, but if you were.
Well, I think the one that aged best is Volume 4, and I think the reason for that is because I was getting more used to the process. I was getting better at it. Like anything, you just do it more, you get better at it. But that said, I'm not thrilled completely with Volume 4. I mean, it has a ridiculous title, The Complete Course for Rhythm Guitar. Give me a break. Have you ever heard Ted Green's chord chemistry book or seen that? It'll blow your mind. There's a guy up in Vermont, I believe, or New Hampshire, Harvey Reed, who has several books where he's not only in open tunings, but he's using partial capos at different frets, and he's mapped out all these different chords that are possible. I mean, it's just mind-blowing. So that was kind of a ridiculous notion on my part to say I'm writing the complete course for rhythm guitar. But I'm very pleased with the inversions that you had mentioned and trying to bring new things to the table that I think most rock and folk guitarists and blues guitarists don't use on a daily basis, but to just give you a wider vocabulary.
If you want to look at it in a positive note, then it was a great way to market the book by the title. Finally, what advice would you give to new aspiring guitarists today, Andy, both in developing their craft and understanding the deeper purpose behind making music?
It's obviously not possible to answer since I don't know the person who's listening to this and what their skill level is and their background and the amount of time they've had playing an instrument or what have you. But I think the best answer I could give, even if I knew everybody's information, is that you need to be genuine. You need to be as authentic as you can. Do it for yourself. Forget what other people are telling you is going to sell. Can you imagine Jimi Hendrix on that show with Simon Cowell and getting dressed down by him saying, well, you got to own the stage and you got to do this move or that move? None of these people, whether it's Springsteen or Madonna or Elvis Presley, they weren't being guided by the forces of this is the way to go. They were writing their own roadmap. And I think when you approach your art from a position where you're not trying to calculate, you're not trying to anticipate what would work and what wouldn't work commercially and this and that. You're going to produce your best work because 100% of your energy is going towards your work and nothing else. You're not trying to accommodate these other needs that somebody has talked you into thinking they're important. They're going to detract from your work. They're not going to help. You're going to put your best work out if you just do it from your own heart, from your own personality, and just be as honest as you can through it, because people respond to honesty. They do. I mean, look at children. You know, they don't have wide vocabularies, but they speak more truth than most any politician I've ever heard. And you can listen to a 6 or 7-year-old and you can really just be inspired by the fact that they're just so blatantly open and honest.
Yeah.
So I think if you basically just play for yourself, you know, and operate from that position, you're going to do your best work. You're going to do your absolute best work. And even if it isn't commercially successful or whatever your goal had been, you're going to be happy with it. And if you did it all sideways by trying to calculate and anticipate what everybody thought was the right way to go, if it doesn't work, then you also feel kind of like you shot yourself in the foot. Like, why did I do that when I really wanted to do this? So just follow your heart, like Springsteen did, like all these people did who are the greats.
It's awesome. That makes me think of, in your personal life that, if you're a people pleaser, for example, you're always trying to please other people. You'll always second guess yourself, by trying to please everybody else. And it also, popped in my head of, the authenticity that you were talking about with bands. Like, take Led Zeppelin, for example, when a band is, offering integrity and, they're honest about what they're doing and they're, putting their 100% into what it is that they're doing and being honest about it, that equals longevity. If you use bands like
Yeah.
Beatles, or Led Zeppelin,
And it crosses right over. It crosses right over into your actual life. It equals longevity for you as a human being. You start giving away 2% of yourself with this one or that one because it's just too much work to stand up for what you believe. You give 2% of yourself away 50 times, what's left?
I want to thank you again for your time and definitely look forward to seeing what you guys are going on, in the next upcoming years and months. And if anybody wanted to find out what you're doing, where can we go to find out more about what's going on up to date? Your website, you have TikTok, you have Facebook. Where should they find you?
Well, they probably won't right now because I've kind of walled myself off. I'm just trying to be that hermit living in the cave, developing my stuff. When it's ready to be presented, I will let you know, and I will have multiple ways of trying to bring it to people's attention. But I do want to say that it's been a real honor talking with you in general because I respect the premise behind your webpage 1,000%.
Thank you so much, man. Let's get this wrapped up and
Okay.
I'll get it.